let me ask you to weave something into your comment, because I was going to ask you something, which is, when you think about, so you mentioned the, Ivanhoe, you mentioned the, the sit-in at Woolworths, 1960. So from 1960 to 1965, the passage of the Voting Rights Act is 5 years. And when you think about that, from the, what the change that took place in 5 years was just an amazing, trajectory of change and of activity, and, to the march, to the to the Civil Rights Act, to the Voting Rights Act, from nothing to amazing change. So, Janet, how is it so fast? You may start with the other question that you were going to talk about, but.
Well, I'm not sure that I can answer the question of why was it so fast, because for some people it was so slow. But the other thing too is that not to totally disagree with the egalitarianism of SNCC, but there, and I look at the role of the treatment of women within the context of the time. So I will say that, but I mean, Stokely Carmichael, Sekou Touré had a very famous statement about women's role in SNCC. But it was sort of a joke, but there was something to that. And the women who talked when they weren't around you would talk about, we're not going, and maybe it actually speaks to your point that we're not going to be in the kitchen just doing the grits. We're out here doing the real work of this movement. So that to me is a recognition that we need to, if it's not done, to involve everybody, that everybody, without regards to, it seems so, it's probably normative for everybody in this room now, for most people in this room now, that you use all the talent, male and female. It was not normative then. It was not normative in the society as a whole. It was not that normative to the civil rights organizations. SNCC was closer to it than the others, other organizations which had a hierarchy.
Just on this point, A. Philip Randolph's name has been mentioned. Just imagine what it must have been. I think it's hard for those of us who are not a part of that culture to have been a gay man at that moment, and you've got the state, you got the FBI coming after you. You're coming after you as an individual to tarnish an entire movement. And I think we need to go back and look at the complexities of that period, because you're living in a more democratic period, to try to figure out how did people make the stretch against their own prejudices within that movement, to figure out how to get something practically done with one of the greatest strategists of the time. Another lesson to be extracted from that moment. And I think it's very important, not in terms of indicting Stokely or Sekou Touré, but to say what he said, because this was a big issue, as I understand it, and as I lived it in that environment. There was white oppression and exploitation of black people, but there was black men, and this is one of the fundamental democratic issues still around the world today. Look at any society on the face of the earth, and we still have a big problem with male conception of power and validation vis-a-vis the conception of non-males. And it's, as we look back on the value of that struggle, you used the term earlier, we should be careful not to romance it, because there are these internal contradictions. And as we look at the struggles in your generation, you need to identify what those internal contradictions is. This is something I learned from that pensamiento critico, that there are two kinds of contradictions. There's an internal and an external. And if you don't pay attention to the internal contradiction and you're just focusing on the external, at moments of crisis, you will not be able to maximize the human potential within whatever group it is that you're trying to advance for democracy.